Everybody, and for those online, good afternoon and good evening, and thank you so much for joining us virtually. We have a number of IGWG members in the room. We've got this session, I think, just to give some feedback from the last few days. I think this is the third day of our resumed IGWG. So I'm just going to say a few words in opening and then pass to my co-chair, Ambassador Tovar. But I mean, firstly, I just want to say a massive thank you to relevant stakeholders for your ongoing participation in this process. I know you've not been with us in person this week, but I know many of you have been working tirelessly in the sort of intersessional period to help find ways forward. And I think we've had a very good couple of days so far, and I'm sure we'll have another good day today of discussions on different aspects of how we find our way forward for our May agreement. Of course, there are differences, and we work to resolve those differences, but also there is increased common understanding in areas where we are finding more agreement as well, as we all work together for that May deadline. So maybe just a few words on sort of what have been discussed over the last couple of days. We have been looking at a new on-screen text. Unfortunately, we can't discuss in detail today, but just I know that you have received copies of it. But within that on-screen text, I think you can see some important progress on some of the use of terms and scope. Actually, pathogen with pandemic potential, how do we define that? Also around participating manufacture, the role, for example, of developers, and also looking at materials and sequence information and recognising that the differences, but also commonalities between those two areas and how we define it, which of course with all those points links to the rest of the agreement. There's then the operations section, which Ambassador Tovar may want to say more on, but just on the access section, I think some of the discussions we've had have been really helpful on how does this relate to international health regulation? How does detection fit in with those arrangements? And it's really important there's a consistency, as of course is the case with the whole of the agreement. It has been certainly one theme that has come through. Another issue has been around the lab networks. I think we have some great examples of current WHO lab networks, for example, and not exclusively in influenza. Then actually, how do we build on that? How do we actually make the PAB system work in terms of laboratory networks and really increasing understanding of what there is now and what we need to do to build on that for the system. And then the important subject of databases, which I know we've heard lots on from relevant stakeholders in previous meetings, but looking at how do we take forward, we can't in a legal text, that they are not parties to the agreement, but how do we ensure actually databases can be part of this agreement? They play such a key role already in the world today, as we've seen in COVID and in other examples, but how do we ensure that is an effective part of this system as well? And just trying to build that common understanding of how that can work. And then, of course, on benefit sharing also, which, as with everything, Ambassador Tovar will want to add the important issues we discussed back in the IMB around fake monetary contributions. I should also say, in terms of the earlier things, obviously intellectual property, which will always be consistent with what we agreed in the IMB, but are other issues that I think members have been discussing and talking through, which has been really helpful to really increase that understanding. And then finally, the governance section actually in the agreement needs to be enforced. It needs to work in practice. And so actually ensuring that governance system fits in with, for example, what we're doing on databases, what we're doing with lab networks, and also the role of the advisory committee and how does that fit with the COP? How does that fit with sort of more general the DG and WHO rules and procedures, and just trying to find that balance that works for all members. So I think in nearly all these areas we have built common understanding. We have sort of found some strands where actually there is agreement, but yes, there are other areas where there are not agreement, and that's what we need to work on exactly as we did in the build-up to last May to get there. So a good couple of days, lots more to do today, but we really value your input and your expertise as always as stakeholders. So thank you, and I'm sorry this has been the one session we've had with you this week, but we absolutely want to make the most of this and of course follow up with you in the coming days and weeks as well. Ambassador Tovar.
Thank you very much, Matt. Greetings to all of you. Since this is the first interaction we have with you, we hope that we will continue this year to benefit from your inputs and these discussions. And we will try to see how best to make that not only in substance meaningful, but also helpful for the exercise. Now, I think it's important that we also share with you what we have been doing since December. So the Bureau has been very active since December through the holidays, also in order to see if we could provide for the informals that we had last week some specific points. So we started off with suggestions for Section 1 for the use of terms and also for governance. We also benefited from discussions on a table that we produced in order to see clearly what, who, how, and when for the system. So trying to cover all of these, the actors, how they interact with the system, through what instrument, and when. When would that be the triggering moment? So this is, I think, was helpful because through the comments of the members, we were able to see that there's still some ground to cover. So that's why we were not ready to really have so much yellow text at this time, although we did have some yellowing in our discussions, especially in 1 and 3. And with regard to Section 2, which is the operational part, benefit sharing and access, we now can see clearly because we have begun the discussion based on legal text, or an attempt, a suggestion of a legal text. So that, I think that has provided some clarity for the members. They still need more time to discuss and see how that would relate to the other sections, number one, but also if they are in a position to accept that sort of a suggestion of a legal text. This is where we stand. You have received the text that is the latest version of what we have been trying to assemble, and we're very confident that first, we were very happy that we were able to hold this resumed session because, in December there were some doubts about whether it would be necessary, what it was too soon, but then clearly I think everybody could agree that we have been fortunate to have had this occasion. It offered us an extra layer of discussion preceded by informals that were very helpful. So, and now we are going to decide on the next steps this morning. We haven't had that discussion yet. We will continue this morning to discuss Section C first on Section 2, because there was not enough time to discuss that. We've also been holding evening sessions on focused evening sessions on the specific elements of the annex, and we've been graced by the facilitation of member states that have volunteered to help do that. So we are trying to also involve not only all members of the Bureau in the leadership, but also some members that volunteer and stand ready to help us move forward. With that, I will just stop and listen to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ambassador Tovar. So please, in your request to take the floor, I think it's entirely online, so I will follow Pider's steer. European Bioinformatics Institute, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you to the Bureau for circulating the text last night. So the EMBL European Bioinformatics Institute has some specific comments to make on the text. First, in the section relating to access to materials and sequence information, so this is 2B1A2, the text refers to WHO recognized sequence databases, but how recognition, as far as we can see, how recognition is obtained is not specified. So we would like to remind the parties of the important work at WHO in developing the attributes and principles of genomic data sharing platforms supporting surveillance of pathogens with epidemic and pandemic potential that came out last year. So this would provide very usefully a checklist for decision-making in relation to WHO recognition of databases. But also, we would also like to note that it will likely be a plurality of databases working together that in combination satisfy the requirements of the checklist rather than a single database working alone. Later in the same section, 2B1A3, the text suggests that it would be the party that would assign the unique persistent identifiers to PAB's material.
So sorry to interrupt. Just say, I'm afraid we are not allowed to comment on specific lines of the text. So I think it's fine to say databases they are a plurality of databases, not one database, and it's important to consider that as you consider text. But if we could not refer to specific lines, please, as it's due to the rules of how we work. And this also being webcast, it's very important everybody hears the views, but we just have to be consistent. So thank you so much, and sorry to interrupt.
Sure, not at all. Thank you for that that guidance. Yeah. So the on the topic of persistent, unique persistent identifiers, to note that it is the service provider, so the repository or the database that is receiving material or sequence information that would assign and issue the persistent identifier and maintain the overall unique persistent identifier infrastructure. The role of the party would be one of submitting the material, providing the information on the sequence information as part of the deposition upload process. And it would be the party's job to note the identifier and use it in future communications, but it's for the repository or the database receiving material or data to issue and manage the persistent identifier. Thinking of broadly about terms and conditions applicable to databases used for the sharing of PAB's sequence information. The persistent identifiers are important. Interoperability is important. I would like to stress there's a great importance in ensuring that databases, when they share sequence information between themselves, so from one database to another, that the unique persistent identifiers are persisted in that transfer. So it's important that when data travel from one place to another, the identifiers travel with those data and are not lost. I think it's important that the databases receiving PAB sequence information support their users in acknowledging that they're using sequence information and acknowledging those who have originated the data, the contributors. I think a policing role, if that's to be suggested, would be one to avoid, but certainly to expect support for these functions, these activities of users. I would note that the INSDC databases, the public databases, are working on improving attribution of originators, so the labs, the scientists, the parties that are sending data into the system. We're improving attribution, and this will support users wishing to or following the best practice and acknowledging that they are using certain individuals or certain parties' data. So finally, when we think about terms and conditions and how they provide, so terms and conditions for those using information from databases.
Because I interrupted, I've given you some extra time, but I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, please. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just the final point. So I'd remind that that when we talk about public health purposes, and we consider perhaps limiting the use of sequence information that is shared to public health purposes, we would remind that this goes well beyond tracking variant detection, vaccine therapeutics and diagnostics, but includes the development of the understanding of the biology of pathogens, infection cycles, transmission mechanisms and tool development. And ultimately, all of this is really important for the more direct public health purposes. So thank you very much for that. Over.
Thank you very much. And it's very timely in terms of us discussing databases later today, and how the onward transfer is something we've talked about a lot, how the UPI works in practice. Dr. Viraj, I'm conscious we've got a number who want to speak, but I will just turn to you to maybe respond to some of the points raised.
I have a question to European Bioinformatics Institute. As you have said, the design in the text that was shared last night on database is very much technically feasible, right? That's my interpretation. Is that correct? Technically very
Sorry, I missed the last. It's very much. I missed the last words. I couldn't hear you, I'm afraid.
My question is that from your review, that the proposed text that was shared last night was technically very feasible. Is that correct? The UPI, the detention.
There are one or two parts that I think would need to be changed. Like, it's difficult because I can't specifically comment on the text.
I think
but certainly I think requiring databases to ensure ensure acknowledgement, ensure that there are efforts to collaborate, ensure that their downstream practice of using databases is in a particular way is very difficult. I think requiring databases to support people in doing that, to give the right functions to help them to acknowledge, I think that's great. But and it's possible, but I think it's not feasible for them to police.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate we're asking you important questions, but also saying you can't comment on the text. So it's a hard balance, but I think it's very clear what you've said. It's a very helpful context for our discussion. I'm sure there will be others in the room who may have different perspectives. That's valuable as well. But your expertise, as with all our stakeholders, is greatly appreciated. So thank you. Leibniz Institute, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Happy New Year to everyone. I've mentioned in the past that we've spent, in fact, the 2 months manually analyzing pathogen databases for their governance attributes. And I'd like to provide a few highlights, and I'll share a link with colleagues as well. First, on the question of context, we have found that roughly a third of the databases were totally focused on pathogens. 2/3 of the databases were more generalist biological databases, where pathogens with pandemic potential are a small or a portion of the total data set. This teaches us that pathogens are, of course, part of biology, part of biodiversity, and scientists need to use sequence data in an integrative way to understand how life works. Pathogens with pandemic potential data cannot be isolated away from everything else into island pathogen-only standalone databases. Sustainability. We looked at 300 databases and found that actually 40% were dead. They were not active anymore. The data that they held
this one too,
because of a lack of research funding.
3.
Registration. 90% of the reviewed active databases do not require registration to access data. This means that most databases show their content without the requirement to generate a user account and to log in. On interoperability, around 60% of the databases do not enable direct upload or submission of sequence information. This means, excuse me, that these databases depend on reusing and repurposing data from other databases. And so if a PAB systems were to require registration, 60% of the databases could not work with the PAB system because data could not be automatically transferred. And the existing pathogen database landscape would not be able to support pandemic research and prevention. Finally, on geography, most of the pathogen databases were found in high-income countries. 1/3 of them are located in the United States. However, the next two are China and India, followed by a number of European member states and high-income countries. Although we also note the important role of countries like Brazil and Argentina. This means that PABs should urgently consider how to decrease the pathogen sequence database capacity gap and the infrastructure gap. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leibniz. It's an important point on how we build that capacity, and these are really important issues around data registration and all those other points, use registration. And I know obviously a number of different views within this room and amongst our stakeholders. But as I said on the previous speaker, every input is valued. Knowledge Ecology International, please.
Thank you very much. It was good to see a 7-page version of the text, because the last version I looked at was 35 pages. Because we're not there, we're not really sure how things are going in the room. But we know that there's this concern about the upstream access by researchers and the sort of open science aspect, and that's sort of come up in many of the discussions. Depending on how things go, we know that the 2003 BBNJ treaty, the one that had to do with marine resources outside the jurisdiction of national governments, took a different approach than the PABs and the benefit sharing. And they focused, the most important benefit sharing provisions, I think, were on the commercialization of products. And they were not dependent upon access to databases, but they were rather obligations on member states to enforce benefit sharing obligations. And I think it's something that at some point may be useful to take a look at and to ask the question whether or not it might be better to focus the benefit sharing obligations as an obligation on the people that sign the agreement to enforce whether or not people assign a contract in terms of getting data, and to be more permissive in terms of how data is used upstream by researchers. In line with that other approach to the other treaty, the recent 2003 treaty. And, you know, in that respect, I think the idea that you just dump everything on the WHO and the WHO has to sort of make everything work through contracts. What the U.S. is doing with these bilateral agreements on on getting samples and things like that through leverage through its funding agreements, those are real things that are happening that will undermine the leverage you have through the regular system. And then, of course, there's a big diversity in the kind of pandemics you're talking about, and whether or not you can depend upon the conditionality of access to the data to get the benefit sharing, I think, is questionable. And that's why we like the BBNJ approach of member states agreeing. I know from talking to member states, a lot of member states are reluctant to assume any burden or responsibility for the enforcement of the benefit sharing things. And I think that's unfortunate. But I think that at some point, depending on the progress you make, you may
Sorry,
want to go
please
back
conclude.
and take a look at that. I will. I'll conclude right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the link with the BBNJ, and also at that point on the role of WHO is obviously another key one as we look at it. 4 pause, please, followed by the Medicines Patent Pool.
Dear chairs and vice chairs, dear member states, dear bureau, thank you very much for this opportunity to deliver a statement. I deliver this statement on behalf of the organizations Action for Animal Health, Born Free Foundation, 4PAWS, Health Diplomacy Alliance, Phoenix Zones Initiative, Preventing Pandemics at the Source, PRESOT, Proyecto Animales Latinoamerica, Proyecto APA, the Donkey Sanctuary, World Animal Protection, and World Veterinary Association. We reaffirm our full support for the Pandemic Agreement and the PABS Annex as an essential component of the treaty. We commend you on the progress made so far and encourage member states to maintain this momentum through constructive negotiations, a spirit of compromise and practical problem solving to achieve the World Health Assembly 79 Annex adoption target. Informal, cross-regional dialogue to find common landing zones, bridging perspectives early and drawing on multidisciplinary expertise, including from One Health and veterinary science to legal and manufacturing sectors, can ensure proposals are consensus-driven and technically sound. Achieving a PABS system that ensures rapid sharing, equitable benefits, legal certainty, and workable obligations is a vital pillar of the Pandemic Agreement and the shared victory for global health security. So we remain confident that you will conclude the Annex negotiations on time. The Pandemic Agreement will formalize a shared vision of global health equity, where we prevent disease emergence at the earliest stages, strengthen health systems, and practice solidarity in response. We view this framework not just as a legal document, but as a living bridge toward a safer future, and we invite member states to turn these shared principles into reality. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I'm not going to comment because I know we're very short of time. I was going to close the list after Medicines Patent Pool, but we also have the Third World Network. So I'll turn to both MPP and the Third World Network, but just I'm afraid at 2 minutes I'll have to cut you off, or otherwise we lose valuable negotiating time this morning. So Medicines Patent Pool, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Apologies, I'm not able to show my video due to technical issues with my computer system. Thank you for the opportunity. I apologize again that I'm not able to show my video. So we understand that the text was shared last night. However, we at the Medicines Patent Pool have not yet received. Nevertheless, we would like to remind the IGWG that the additional benefits outlined in Article 12.8, including non-exclusive licensing and technology transfer, are central to MPP's mandate and reflect our long-standing collaboration with WHO and member states. Accordingly, we remain available to share practical experience from our work related to the sharing of benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and also for your brevity, and thank you for your offer of being involved as well. We appreciate what you and all stakeholders do. Farewell Network, please.
Well, all the best for the new year, Co-Chair. Let me be very brief with four points. First, ABS concerns not only access and benefit sharing, but also utilization. Those who access PAPS materials and or sequence information must be therefore subject to legally binding terms of use under contracts. This is an established practice. If there is an uncertainty about elements such as conditions on the use of pathogen genomic data or database governance or compliance procedures using databases, etc., we can refer to one or more EU regulations and guidance documents from the European Commission, which clearly demonstrate that such elements are feasible and some of them are in practice too. Second, there are proposals to apply terms of reference to laboratories and database without explaining how these would become legally binding through contractual arrangements with WHO. We recall to the prior to the PIP framework, non-binding laboratory guidelines were not effectively followed within GSRIS, which led precisely to the creation of PIP framework and SMTAs. This lesson should not be disregarded. Third, in a recent panel discussion organized by United Nations Institute on Disarmament Research Force on Cyber Security, they very clearly called for moving from a location-based to identity-based authentication in accessing pathogen data and AI models to prevent misuse, especially for pandemic potential pathogens. This reinforces the need for user identification in accessing PAP sequence information. And many bioinformaticians have explained that user registration is not a hindrance to interoperability. It might be in some sense of, some particular ways of interoperability, it might look like a hindrance, but this is not necessarily a real hindrance to interoperability. Fourth, limiting databases to merely informing users of benefit sharing expectations undermines the equal footing principles. While member states are obligated to share data, users are not correspondingly obligated to share benefits. This approach is inconsistent with Article 12. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thanks so much, Farewell Network. And I think the points on user registration, informing users, I think obviously we've heard that other speakers on this, and those sort of richness of views are really going to help us as we go into the discussion on databases later. So I'm very grateful for your contribution as always. Thank you. So I'm so sorry to relevant stakeholders, we don't have more time. We've really appreciated this sort of short time discussing this morning, but this is an ongoing piece of work that we're doing together, where we'll of course be liaising in the context of the next IGWG, and I'm sure we'll see a number of you at the closure of the session later. So thank you so much. Thank you to all involved today and all who are listening online. And we're now going to take a very short, literally 1-minute break as we then move into our next formal session this morning. Thank you so much.